Well, first of all, throughout the war years, it had great raising of spirits of the public. I think it was more important really than newspapers, which dealt with the ghastly bad news, but Picture Post tried to raise morale.
What did people feel reading the magazine? Was it something they looked forward to getting?
Oh, very much, very much. I mean, if you read biographies of well-known people who are mature age now, invariably I always look, when I get a book out of the library, biography, I look in the index at the back and under P to see if they mention Picture Post. And it's amazing the number of times that this person has, the whole family have shared on it. But don't forget, that was a magazine that everybody could read. There was no barring of any sort of subject. But it was never gruesome, and as a lot of stuff is today. And my very first assignment, how it came about, you mean? Well, I during the war, everywhere you went in the Middle East and places, you would see copies of Picture Post floating about, chucked on the ground in cafes, and I really looked at them for the first time, and that's what attracted me. I thought these dramatic pictures, which largely Bert's probably in those days, that was some sort of photography that immediately appealed to me. I didn't want to do gracious portraits or anything like that. I wanted movement and drama and storytelling, particularly. It's interesting, isn't it, that in Picture Post time, nobody ever talked about an assignment. That had no currency, that word. You went on a story. How did your story go, they say? As if we... But...
Portraits of people like Kurt.
Yes, Kurt, don't forget, was a magnificent all-round photographer. I mean, he had style in his pictures, quite different to, let's say, somebody like Cecil Beaton, who was quite clearly a portrait photographer. But we took portraits, if we needed to, on the side, on the run, as it were. We never sort of posed people stiffly. We wanted to catch them off. Now, you know that wonderful picture of Cartier-Bresson's of, oh God, I'm going to forget his name, the French philosopher, on the bridge.
Jean-Paul Sartre.
That's right. Yeah. And that moment which he caught perfectly, and it was 100 times better than any studio portrait would have been. My real interest in photography started, well, when I went to that agency I was telling you about, where I was asked to do graphic work, and the old gentleman who ran the agency put me on to what are known as at home. That's magazines like the Tatler and the Spectator published at homes, which was usually 2 glossy pages of the famous person, probably in the kitchen and this sort of thing, you know, a glimpse of a day in the life of. That was it. Now that caught on and that fascinated me. I loved doing these things. And I mean, I've photographed Noel Coward, A Day with Noel Coward, and people like that. That was absolutely marvelous. That was another thing. My literary yearnings were lapping up, not only visually, but also on their speech and how they greeted me, and so on. So that was a double plus for me, you see. Now, the sad thing is that when I got back to England after the war, my first action was to go up to Fleet Street. And what I wanted to get was prints of all these people that I needed, because I wanted some important pictures to approach picture posts with, you see. And people like Noel Coward and a lot of American film stars came over, and I photographed them on Waterloo Station, you know. And when I came back, I went up to Fleet Street, turned off Fleet Street into Johnson's Court, and I was said, well, where's the agency? It's gone. There was a gap between these two buildings. And when we went close, I found I was looking down into a great hole, great square hole. Nothing there at all, no trace of anything. In other words, the entire library had been wiped out in one night. Tatler. And one of the main contributors to the Tatler was a photographer called Swaby. It was quite a name to play with in the 30s and 40s and 50s, Swaby. And I got a job there, but I wasn't terribly happy with it because it was literally photographing society people who knew they were getting photographed, you know, these groups and things you get, you see. And in the end, I resigned from that. But old man Swaby said the last thing to me, he said, well, Godfrey, you go back to your painting, because I don't think you're going to make it as a photographer. And 2 or 3 years after I'd been on Picture Post, I was photographing a theatrical event in the theatre in the afternoon, in a rehearsal. And suddenly I heard behind me somebody shouting out, I was wrong, I was wrong. And it was old Swaby, and he came down and embraced me. So that was a bit of encouragement, you see. But still, of course, the really big thing was to get on Picture Post. And that, what I did with that, I did it, it took me several weeks. I did a dummy copy of Picture Post, made up from pictures I'd taken during the war, down at Brighton where I lived and so on. And I copied the front cover lettering and everything and coloured it in and so on. And it was quite a substantial parcel when I took it to the post office and pushed it over the counter. And I thought, well, maybe I'm an idiot doing this, you know. But it did the trick. I had a call the next day from Deverson, the picture editor. And he said, well, we want to see you. We've got this. So let's come over and have a lunch and talk. And that's how it started. They were probably a bit amazed at my doing this dummy thing, you see, because I wrote the captions underneath and I copied the style of Picture Post captions, you know, the sort of adjectives they used and so on. So I think it amused them probably more than anything else.
And also you could write, I guess you could write good copy to go with it, good captions.
Yes, I did, yes. Yes, I enjoyed it, you see. I've always loved writing.
And
loved writing. First of all, I phoned Picture Post and asked if I could come up and have an interview. I'm a photographer. I said to them I was a photographer in the RAF, as if that meant anything. It didn't really, but it sounded good. And that probably worked the trick. And they said, come up on a certain day at a certain time. Now, when I went up there, I was surprised, first of all, the place seemed totally deserted. It was the old Evening Standard building, and if I remember it, Picture Post was on the 2nd or 3rd floor up, and then a library above it and so on. And so I got up there, and when the lift stops and you see a long corridor passing all the offices of the writers, And I walked along it, and nobody to talk to, nobody to ask a question. The place was deserted. And then suddenly somebody came, oh yes I do, an elderly woman went and told this other man that somebody was there waiting to be seen. So he then appeared, and I explained what I was wanting to do, and he led me through into one of those offices on the right-hand side. It wasn't an office, it was full of clothes pegs, we're hanging up on them. And it had, I remember, a very, very dull yellow bulb in the ceiling, and an empty table, a long empty table. And he said, right, put my prints in a box, cardboard box. So they were 12 tens, I think. I hadn't got round to 15 12s by then. And I put this box on the table, lifted the top off, and I said, well, there you are, would you care to look through them? And he took them out, and this is really depressing. He never made any remark whatsoever. He looked for, I think I had 20 or 30 prints, and there it was, the pile there, and I was waiting for him to say, well, yes, not bad or interesting or something, not a word. Then he took the lid and put it back on the box. And he said, I will give you a word of advice. I would keep photography for all your weekends. Those were his very words. Now, this goes on, this. I went very depressed downstairs with my box of prints. And there used to be, before it was all built over, there was a pub which almost opposite the front door of the Evening Standard. And I went across there and I bought myself a scotch, and I sat down and I thought, there's something wrong here. This can't be how the great Picture Post treats photographers. And then I thought, well, okay, you're going to see me again. So I went back home, thought about this. And it was then I hit upon the idea of doing a dummy copy. You see, I'd missed that other bit there. And so I posted the dummy copy, and Devison said, come up and have a bite. Of course, by absolute chance, the date they'd fixed was the day that Tom Hopkinson resigned. And everybody in Picture Post was gathered in the big room round Tom and talking about, how dreadful, and everybody, of course, was obviously very shocked and depressed by the fact that, because this was so sudden. Nobody had any warning that Picture Post was going to close. The man that saw me was somebody who worked in the correspondence department and knew nothing whatever about photography, you see. And of course in England it built up this marvellous trust in the public. Now, there are two things in that period that opened doors without any doubt whatsoever. One was, I'm from the BBC. Instantly, people trusted, you see, and we did the same with Picture Post. I'm from Picture Post. Oh, how interesting! Come in. Do you want? You must have a cup of tea, and so on. So we had great support from the public. And I don't recollect ever anybody objecting.
Fantastic. So,
I mean, it was so simple. For instance, all of us like her users, I'm sure Bert certainly did the same. You always kept your camera on a certain focus, which maybe it was 4 yards or something, I can't remember now, but I always, and the same stop. You knew you were on 5/6, you see, so that you could quickly push it the other way or whatever. Well, that was it, really.
Pre-focus.
We used Rolleiflexes quite a bit, but in a rather different situation, where you're much more conscious of taking your time and framing the picture on a Rolleiflex. But the Leica was something you could pick up and just like that, and you got the picture. Yeah, I always, if I was given a big story, like let's say the Liverpool slums, well, I made lots of notes. I got books out of the library. I didn't, we did our homework before we went away. I did Liverpool slums with, in fact, Grace's father, Fife Robertson. But whatever stories we went on, for instance, to give you an idea how things were done with theatre, the London Theatre longed to get big spreads in Picture Post. It was a great seller of seats, Picture Post. And David Mitchell, one of my favourite journalists to write with, although I didn't really have favourites, they were all great favourites. But he and I went up to Birmingham for the where John Gielgud, and I can't remember the woman's name, but was in God, yes, I'm sorry, I'm drawing on this. Much Ado About Nothing. They were doing Much Ado About Nothing. Now, the office had been in touch with them and cleared the ground and so on. And David and I sat in the very centre of the first circle. And I had a notepad with me. And every time I saw a moment when Gielgud did something like this, I made a rough note, something, a sign or something that would remind me, you see. And after this, we'd watched the whole performance. We went backstage and met the cast and the director, I can't remember who he was, and we said, these are the pictures we would like to do. And it was a great big list, I can tell you. And they said, well, we'll do the whole show again tomorrow. And that's what they did, including the ballet. Today, to expect a big cast to do that, unthinkable, you see. You're lucky if you get one shot. But that again, that was Picture Post doing it. They probably wouldn't have done that for tidbits or something. I suppose my favourite story was another one I did with David Mitchell, because Picture Post had a weekly Monday morning round table with the editor and all of us round, and we were up to put our suggestions, you see. And David and I had long ago said we must get to France and do Paris. That's what we want. So we put this up 2 or 3 times, and each time the editor said, "Oh well, no, I don't think so." No. And then once it had happened, and we went and we did the story of the Seine, up and down the Seine on barges, and that was heaven. Absolutely, the people on the barges were so charming and so friendly. Come in, downstairs and drinks and all this kind of thing. Marvellous. And of course, immediately after the war, they were very, very much disposed towards us. The little incident I remember of that, I wanted a picture of Notre Dame at night, and they just started putting floodlights on. and there was this great, those towers up, flooded it, and but there was no chance of me getting anything in the foreground. And I said to David, look, David, roll up your coat collar and light a cigarette, or I'm going to get you to light a cigarette in the foreground. And he did this beautifully, you know, so blowing on it, sort of red. And that was the picture they used. So the writers quite often appeared in pictures, sometimes not recognised at all.
Magazine closed. What was the impact really? Because it must have been a
It's
very
difficult
sad
to say. Yes, I mean, everybody was stunned by this. And I might say that we were told the picture post was closing through the 5 o'clock news on television, not to us. We were asked to go into the boardroom. We all filed in the bedroom, not knowing something very big had happened. We were asked to take our seats and wait. And there was a television set in the middle of this great boardroom table. And Hulton himself came on to the screen and announced that, to his regret, Picture Post was going to close. I can't remember the exact words. But it was, you know, we all rushed out, of course, and went to pubs and drank. And But very sad indeed. Yes, well, my usual practice was, either alone or with the writer, was to get things down on paper and say, you know, how do we want him? How do we want him sharing with the with the public, going around visiting sick people. He was a good man, Reindorp. I was very, very impressed with him. I thought this man is a good man, you know. Thank goodness there are a lot of them. Then we went and met him, and he had some suggestions. And then I did the walk around Pimlico, and I discovered there's a building in Pimlico, I hope it's still there, which has a sort of checkboard front to it, which is very dramatic. And I took the Reverend Reindorp to there one morning, and luckily it was spitting with rain, not teeming, but spitting with rain, and he put an umbrella up. The combination of this checkboard building behind, a woman leaning out of a window high up, who knew him, of course, and the umbrella in the front made a beautiful composition. So that was one came out of that. Then there was the visiting of the sick. Well, that was very dramatic. I wasn't too happy about doing it, but he said yes, we'll do it. And there wasn't a great variety of pictures except what I made out of compositions. For instance, one of the pictures that Post gave a good space to was of a boy in one of the Pimlico blocks of flats in the sort of opening in between them, and there are lines of washing stringing across. Again, you know, this made a picture. When I saw that washing, I thought, oh yes, this is it. And but the thing is, when I had an appointment, I knew he was going to come. Reindorp was going to come at just after 9. So I took my position on one of the balconies around these flats, you see, and looking down, and I'd measured it and everything, that I'd get the right time. And I waited for Reindorp to come. Now, Reindorp came striding across, you see, and stopped. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, and this is a bit of absolute luck, a small boy ran into the picture. He ran forward, I think he was holding something, and Rindle, of course, stopped and bent over and looked down and talked to him, and that was the picture. So, awful lot of good photography, I think, is dependent on luck. But you've got to be prepared for the luck and recognise it. I honestly I can't think of any instance where I was faced with something so horrible or something that I didn't... I was aware when taking photographs in the street and in crowds and so on, that there were sometimes, you got the impression there were certain people didn't want to be photographed, you know. They sort of half turned away, and I never then rushed round the front and tried to photograph them. I'm probably pulling faces.
No, this is very good.
Oh, you're probably picking up. Of course, I'll be getting this as on movie. Yes, well, pictures like that, you see. Well, I think the point, photograph subjects in very, very bad light. You relied on bracing yourself against a wall or a fence or something, because you're going to use a very slow speed. But I loved photographing things on the edge of darkness, what Dickens called the mongrel hour. And many of my more successful pictures, I think, are taken in a poorish light. Now, I often wonder now whether that sort of effect is even possible with digital cameras and colour, because it particularly worked with black and white. I started on picture post, and I'd already knew quite a few press photographers in Fleet Street from this agency I worked from, and when they saw me appearing with this, because previously I'd used a very clumsy press camera, when they say, "Oh, what do you want? Well, that toy's no good to you, is it?" That was their attitude. 5 years later, everybody in Fleet Street was using 35mm. I put forward the story to the editor to do, first of all, I think it was children's games on the streets, and then they turned it to children of the pavements, and that left me much freer to go around. And not a lot I can say about this, because the children make the pictures, but you had to be very, very fast, because the first thing they do, they run to you and say, "Take my picture, mister." You see, and that's what you don't want. So I had to sneak on and encourage them to play with each other in games. This is a tango these two girls were performing. And the boy coming out of the pavement hole, which is not in my book, but that was another surprise one. I could hardly believe my eyes, because a man with a dirty face coming out, you would have thought immediately, oh, well, that's something. But when this boy's face with the feathered Red Indian's headdress came out, that was about another bit of absolute luck.
Yeah.
She was actually sitting Well, first of all, I sneaked onto the set by keeping in between pieces of scenery piled up, and I could pop out. I'm sure she knew I took this picture. I did. I had a fairly long lens on that, so I didn't have to get too close. But again, what can I say?
Yeah.
The thing that I remember about that story is that when at the end of the day, I had Bob Muller, one of our top writers, with me, and who spoke French perfectly and so on, and it was arranged that we would go and have lunch with Bergman and Jean Renoir and the stagehands. We all came together like that,
What you're remembering is the democratic feel.
Yes.
Everybody was there, irrespective of position.
Yes. Oh, I know what it was. Somehow or other, I had a dilemma over this, because for some reason I was seated at this round table, an ordinary cafe, not a posh place at all, just, scrub table, great big round table. We were all round it, and somehow I got myself seated in between Bergman and Renoir. And I suddenly realised that what I've got to do, I've got to get up and go and photograph this scene from the other side. And I'd leave my seat there, and that would be awkward. And so I didn't in fact take photographs in there. It's one of those situations, where you're being treated so nicely, and you feel. I did the same with Graham Greene when I met him on the train, and we were talking about his books and his film, and I could not go in my pocket, pull my Leica out and start taking pictures like that. It would have ruined the whole atmosphere. Assignment.
Philosophy, really, that you wouldn't intrude.
Sorry?
You weren't intrusive on Picture Post. You had a respect for the people. That was the whole
Yes,
point.
I suppose I was sort of brought up, there's certain things you do and certain other things you'd never do. And I got it into my head that I know what it was. This has stuck with me all my life. My mother, I had a gun, a toy gun which fired those feathered darts or something, and I was a very small boy, I suppose, and I'd run up to when the uncle came and say, "Hands up," what's that? And my mother said, "Never do that. Never point a gun at somebody and say, 'Hands up.' It's rude." And that somehow that's just persisted in my mind. There are certain things that are too rude.
Yes, common courtesy. There's nothing wrong with that. David Mitchell was offered the job of running the Paris office of Magnum, so he went over for the weekend. He came back a shattered man. I said, "What's the matter?" He said, "It's dreadful. We went out to have meals." He said the whole lot of them were dashing around with cameras at the slightest opportunity. He said, "I would go mad in that situation. I've turned the job down." So we were a different lot.
My years with Picture Post were equally enjoyable. I liked communicating with people, and it was as good at the beginning as it was at the end. Picture Post needn't have closed, but it was mismanagement and all sorts of other problems, I'm sure. But many of the critics said, "Why is it closed, you see?"
I think it
So,
was closed.
To me, it was a very, very happy time, and particularly this warmth of welcome to you when you're rapped on doors and things. One little thing that makes me smile, I told you we went up and photographed John Gielgud in, God, I've forgotten the Shakespeare play, not Measure for Measure.
Much Ado About Nothing.
Huh?
Was it Much Ado About Nothing?
Yes, it was, of course. And Gielgud, he was a daunting figure. In the play, he wears a great tall hat, absurdly tall hat, and he carried a great staff.
Yeah.
I can't remember the play enough, but beyond that, and he stood out, of course, from everybody else. And when I went on the stage and I started taking incidents and plays and so on, he called me over and he said, "Young man, I will be much obliged if you will only photograph my left profile." Which, of course, I've completely ignored.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I think that's great.